This call is being recorded.
So welcome everybody to our ACRE webinar entitled Boundaries and Borders. What are they and why do they matter? Very briefly, I would like to point out to those who are not aware that back in the spring of 2012, ACRE commissioned a research study in which we asked rabbis to rate the importance of different topics in the field of continuing rabbinic education. And the number one topic of interest to them was spiritual practices. And the number two topic was pastoral care and counseling. So for a long time, I've wanted us to have the opportunity to hear from an expert in that field on a webinar. And we are very fortunate today that we are going to be hearing from Dr. Michelle Friedman. A very brief introduction. She did not want me to tell you so much about all of the accolades that I could. So very briefly. Michelle Friedman is a graduate of Barnard College, NYU's Medical School, Columbia Psychoanalytic Institute. She is Director of Pastoral Counseling at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah Rabbinical School. She also has her own private practice of psychiatry and is right now in the final editing stages of a book entitled This is Hard to Talk About, A Jewish Guide to Pastoral Counseling. Her co-author is Dr. Rachel Yehuda. I'm going to turn over the webinar to Michelle and thank her in advance for spending some time with us and sharing some of her wisdom and knowledge that she's accumulated over the years and has been a great friend to ACRE, and I appreciate her taking the time to do this. I'm also going to share, for those of you who are looking on the computer, the outline of today's webinar. So Michelle?
Okay, so people have the outline, and thank you so much, Stephen, for the lovely introduction, and also to the participants, because you're all leaders and teachers in the field, and I'm looking to learn from you how this material resonates with you, and I hope that when we get to the second half, when I'm going to go through the categories, as you now have in front of you, people will be able to maybe share brief snippets of their own experience regarding these different categories. So let me start off, and I'm really going to try to stick to the time outline that I've set up for myself to keep things moving. And, you know, as Stephen pointed out to you, my background is a combination of a formal psychiatric training, which does come out of the medical model. So my focus tends to be more clinical and practical, kind of applied. And, you know, I've obviously spent many years in the Jewish community and being involved with Jewish community, which is how I was recruited to start this pastoral counseling program at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, where this stuff comes out of. And I just want to acknowledge that the structure of the categories does come from psychiatric gedolim, Guthiel and Gabbard, if people are interested in looking up that material, or I'd be happy to give Steve the reference of how I constructed this. Okay, so let's go to our topic of the day, which is boundaries. You know, what are they, and why are they important? And it's coming up with a one-liner about what are boundaries is actually a little bit hard. But what I want to stay with, and I do invite people to comment along the way. I know you're muted now, but if you would like to comment, I really do invite that. I think boundaries help you define your role, which may be as a rabbi in direct service, but I know that most of you are teachers and supervisors and mentors. So there's different levels of this whole boundary nomenclature, which is, of course, the direct service or the direct relationship between clergy and congregant. But then there's other levels, which is between a supervisor and a supervisee, a mentor rabbi and a mentee. And the point of all of this is that it starts with a notion of boundary, starts with a person's understanding of what their role is in the relationship and how they can most effectively use that role and cultivate the goal of the relationship. Now, I kind of start with that because the whole thing of clergy boundaries is a very sort of porous and kind of moving target. And I say that because the essence of the religious vocation is, at least as I see it, to touch people deeply, to move people, the old afflict the comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable, move people into deeper spiritual states, help people get closer to whatever their notion of Torah spirituality is. The point of this being that you're working in a kind of moving emotional range. The point of clergy is to get up close and personal with people, and that gets into a zone that's volatile and unpredictable. And I think I put a little lower down on the handout, looking at the difference between the mental health professional and clergy. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this. Amy, I know you're a psychologist, but shrinks spend an enormous amount of time in training and in supervision in paying attention to the transference, to the whole emotional, psychological baggage, history, whatever it is, dynamics that get transferred onto the therapist. In fact, in our business, that's our best instrument. We don't have stethoscopes. We don't have X-rays in a big way. We have the transference. We see what happens in the room with a patient, with a client, and we see what we feel, the countertransference, what's evoked, what's elicited in the mind and the heart of the therapist, and that is what's alive in the room, and that's really the guts of what hopefully transforms people in therapy into different states, better ways of operating, higher levels of choice, different realms of choice, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is the same thing is going on in the clergy relationship. That the power of relationship is what transforms people. It's what moves people to connect in whatever ways, and I'm certainly not talking denominationally here, to relationships, to God, to ritual, to Israel, to culture, to whatever it is. It's most of the time the power of a relationship. And relationships, as we know, can sort of all of a sudden, shoot off in all kinds of directions. It taps into very powerful, basic places that can become all of a sudden sort of morph into something else. And so there's a huge amount of time spent in shrink school talking about erotic transference and paranoid transference and this and that, and how do you safeguard and shape the transference. And so there's all of these, time-honored rules, which are more or less adhered to, about therapists not socializing with patients and not revealing so much personal data, on and on and on. Now, when you apply this, to the clergy relationship, whether it's with clergy and congregants or supervisors and supervisees, teachers in rabbinical school, the different levels of relationships that you inhabit, that's preposterous. I mean, obviously, all rabbis are socializing with their congregants. They're davening with their congregants. They're going to beach parties, yoga classes, or whatever. So all that kind of nice, I'm going to see you on Tuesdays from 2:45 to 3:30, and then next Tuesday, that just doesn't happen. It's just the essential nature of in congregational life. And by the way, when I say congregational, I mean generally speaking. I'm talking about the clergy person who's an educator. I'm talking about people in Hillel. I'm talking about chaplains. I'm talking about people who are working in Jewish institutions. Not just the sort of formal God box, rabbi working in a pulpit thing. But I believe very strongly, and I really teach this to my students all the time, that the power of clergy is really profound, and I see this across all the denominations and in non-denominational people, that there is a spiritual authority and wisdom that's vested in clergy, that people that it has its own issues. We could talk about the perils of that some other time, the loneliness, all that kind of stuff, the otherness that comes with it. But it's a really serious power, and that's what the boundaries are talking about. Is how do you protect that? How do you respect, protect, and so that you can best use that? I would really say sacred responsibility of your vocation to transform people and communities. So I think I've kind of talked about the different, whatever your role is, if it's, like I said, pulpit, organization, chaplaincy, Hillel, youth work, whatever it is, you're applying this to your particular position. And the other thing that I want to put in here while we're talking about the whole notion of transference, which I'm really assuming with a sophisticated audience like this, is not a new concept. And if anybody would like to spend some more time talking about transference, I'm happy to do that. But I want to expand it right now into kind of a couple of directions, which is that when the more sort of classic model, let's say from, 30, 40, 50 years ago and back, was the male rabbi and congregants. And I want to really, as we're talking, and I don't know how many people are on the call at this point and what people's different relationships are with what their roles are and stuff like that. But I really want us to be thinking more broadly in terms of the opening up, obviously, of gender. That what's the difference between the transference to male clergy and now the growing number of female clergy? How does that transference, counter-transference play out? So if people would think, whatever your notions were of what the more sort of old-fashioned dyad was, what is the transference, counter-transference issues for female clergy? What are the boundaries there? There are certain things about women's lives that are more obvious. For example, I've talked to a number of women clergy about what it's like to be a pregnant rabbi. So the boundaries and borders of private life, etc., when it comes to that, are really, quite different. And I also, of course, want to bring in the whole issue of LGBTQ rabbis and congregants, which is, I think, a growing issue, and also opens up, I believe, extends the paradigm in larger, broader directions. So I want us to be thinking as we go through the different categories pretty soon about how do these the growth of our world in terms of including much more diverse people in as clergy. How does that change certain basic aspects of boundaries, of the core notion of transference, counter-transference that I've just evolved a little bit before? What's the same and what's different when the rabbi, teacher, administrator, head of organization, head of school, whatever, is not the kind of maybe, like I said, from 40, 50 years ago, white guy. And I should also put in people of color, although I think that's probably a more rare phenomenon, but it is something that should definitely be included. So, like I said before, this whole notion of boundary really revolves around, I think you have to come back to a core issue. And I know a lot of you are teaching clergy and working with groups, and this is a principle that I come back to, which is, what is my role? What's my role in this situation? What does a rabbi do here? I mean, I'm using rabbi as a kind of general catch-all term because I think clergy person sort of sounds, I don't know, like Protestant or something. So I'm just going to say rabbi. But I'm really referring to, certainly to Maharats, certainly to people, when we titled our book, This is Hard to Talk About, we really wrote it for people in positions of Jewish spiritual authority. And as you know, that could be the after-school Hebrew teacher for a lot of people. That's going to be the most significant Jewish authority person in their world. Or it could be their day camp director. Or it could be the JCC director. Or it could be the person who officiates at their parent's funeral. I mean, I'm just talking about. I think that for a lot of people, the enormous. Those people really need to be helped with understanding the power of transference that comes their way, because it's really something, and they're thrust into a position of being expected to intervene, help, be wise, give some kind of direction, guidance, and they are not prepared for that, and kind of see themselves as like one of the folks. And I think it really helps them to understand, like I said, the power and the privilege and very much the responsibility of that position. So, as I said, the clergy role, the power of it is getting up close and personal with people, and it can be, it can be volatile, and it can go in all sorts of different directions. So, part of the notion of boundaries, or a reason for it, is protecting and I use this word deliberately, sacred clergy, congregant, teacher, student, whatever that dyad is, or it's not necessarily a dyad, but I think that's where it most often lodges, relationship. And so protecting it so that it can flourish, so that the work that you want to do can flourish. So people can feel safe in revealing powerful, shameful, perhaps, scary things. They can feel that the clergy, the rabbi, is going to hold this material with confidentiality, that the rabbi is going to respond to them outside of this encounter, wherever it may be, in a kind of regular way. They can kind of go back to, room temperature and sort of behave with each other. It's not going to be strange or different, all that kind of thing. So I think that notion of privacy is very important. I do want, of course, to make mention of protection. And here I'm talking both protection for the congregant, and again I'm using congregant very, very loosely. Congregant is whoever is on the other side of the defined clergy person. Now, they could both be rabbis. Like I said, somebody could be doing spiritual direction or, instruction or mentorship or whatever, and they're both clergy. But I'm talking. I think you understand the pairing that I'm talking about. So I think it's for the protection of both. Earlier when a few of us were on the conversation, just getting on the phone, there was mention made of some stuff in the news. And, of course, what often, very sadly, comes up in the news are these terrible stories of boundary violation, of boundary infraction. And the majority of the ones that make the newspapers or whatever, the social media, are, of course, sexual violations. And these are... they're of course in all levels. I mean, they're usually it's generally male clergy perpetrating. Sometimes it's an adult congregant. Usually, if it's an adult congregant, it's usually a woman, and the whole issue of consent or adult consent, whatever. My principle, a guiding principle in this is I think that there's never consent. I mean, there may be said consent, but I think that there is a fundamental power imbalance, which is, again, what this whole boundary talk is addressed to, that the rabbi is, in a way, the grown-up in the room and really has to protect, has to watch out for these different kinds of subtle shifts or not so subtle shifts, and be the one to be having his or her finger on his or her emotional pulse and saying, oh, something is changing here. Why is it changing? What's changing? What's going on in me? How do I get this into a place of dignity and a place of safety for both of us? But I was, quite involved in, well, I don't have to get into those kind of specifics now. I think it'll take us a little far afield here. But in terms of protection, we're talking about protecting congregants, adults, men and women. I really don't want to be discriminatory in terms of the boundary violations, in terms of gender identity, sexual preference, etc. I think we really have to think broadly in terms of this. And I think it's also important in terms of boundaries and protection for the rabbi, because false accusations, spurious accusations are really, as I'm sure we all know, devastatingly damaging to somebody's reputation reputation and life. And so I'm talking about protecting the reputation and safety of clergy as well. Now, that's on the kind of like bigger scale, or the more notorious scale. And as I said before, that type of thing tends to be more sexual boundary violations that hit the press. But there's also other kinds of boundary violations that occur that can be really damaging and hurtful. Maybe, as I said, not as salacious as, I don't know, like a sexual boundary violation, but certainly financial boundary violations, things that verge on exploitation, where as I said, the kind of sacred privilege has been abrogated, and there's a sense of, something was sort of traded. The rabbi has been kind of corrupted, because of a favor, because of whatever it is, and that is a very, very damaging thing. Now, on the less salacious or newsworthy, or not newsworthy, newsmaking, I'm not saying it's newsworthy all the time, but I also want to be thinking, and I want to be talking about boundaries in terms of helping to secure, protect, enshrine, no, not enshrine, that seems too fossilized, but to protect rabbis' private life. So that's another huge dimension of this. Rabbis often feel that they are on and should be on or available 24/7. That the rabbi and as congregants certainly feel that way, and that the whole notion of when is the rabbi's private time, when is the rabbi's family time, when does the rabbi get to hang out or just to sort of chill or relax, is incredibly important. And so this talk about boundaries is not just talking about protecting you, your students, the people in your institutions, whatever it is, from scandal, but also protecting you from burnout, helping to take care of the rabbi's resources to put back in the resource bank, to keep the work vital. I mean, nobody can feel, I think, excited and nourished by their vocation unless they have a life that is that is happy, that is harmonious. And we know that everybody, rabbis, dentists, shoemakers, bus drivers, go through dark times of whatever sort, whether it's illness, physical or mental, whether it's troubles at home of whatever sort, outright conflict, boredom, dissatisfaction, financial, people's feelings like they're not achieving their potential, the book that they wanted to write isn't getting written, the institution that they wanted to found didn't get funded, whatever it is, everybody goes through dark times, and it's really important that the rabbi be prepared for that as well. And the whole notion of boundaries and privacy is about that whole thing as well. So I wanted to spend a moment on, again, I'm thanking Guthill and Gabbard for this nomenclature of using something that I find very helpful, and I think students find helpful, and that is the looking at the difference between boundary crossings and boundary violations. Because, like, let's say, with these categories that we're going to talk about in a minute are going to be like sort of how you establish your baseline, like what style fits for you. And I'll tell you in advance, short of overt exploitation, which is like having sex with a congregant or ripping off their IRA or something like that, which is 100% a no-no, like no way going there. All other stuff, I'm saying it's going to be up to you. I mean, you've got to decide. I have strong feelings about some of them, but I'm hoping we'll be able to have some discussion on these topics as to what you feel is right. But there isn't any one way to do this, and that's why I think that the terms boundary crossings and violations are helpful. So, in my mind, and again, I thank those two writers, a boundary crossing really refers to like a little bit of an unusual departure from your general protocol. So let's say you are you are a Hillel rabbi, and you usually meet with students or the Hillel rabbis you supervise, or whatever it is, meet with students at the famous coffees that they're all taking people out to, or so they meet in the local Starbucks or whatever thing, or they meet on campus, or they go for a walk in College Walk. But let's say there's some kid that, really just is not amenable to that, and that kid, wants to go play basketball, or do some kind of other activity like that. Now, is that a boundary violation? A violation I'm obviously setting up as being something more serious and problematic. I don't see a boundary crossing as necessarily a problem. Of course, in this whole discussion, there is the notion of the slippery slope. And generally speaking, boundary violations, which are the severe, we are worrying about that category, don't happen just one fine day. There is almost always a kind of preparation, whether it's conscious or unconscious, on one party or the other, but things sort of change. But change slowly. Getting back to boundary crossings, I've certainly known of rabbis who have gone shopping with congregants for whom there was nobody to go with them to buy, a suit for an important event, or take them for a haircut, or go with somebody who really doesn't have anybody else to do something with. I think those are the kinds of things that I would consider not typical rabbinic activities, but helpful, unusual, but not something that you wouldn't want to tell another person about. And I think the litmus test for boundary violations is you don't want anybody to know about this. You really want to keep it a secret. You definitely don't want to know that you were counseling Miss X or Mr. X, and you knew you shouldn't have made that appointment at so late, or you shouldn't have really had that call or that texting thing going on at 11:30 or midnight, but it sort of seemed okay. And then you kind of got into a pattern of doing it regularly, and then somehow things slipped to using different ways of speaking to each other, and then somehow you wound up having dinner or going for a drive, and then things became overtly sexual. I mean, that's what I'm talking about, a slippery slope. But probably somewhere along that cascade that I just made up, you would not want anybody to know about that. And I think it is a good litmus test to apply. Am I really I want this to be a secret? And I think when one feels, I'm using you generically, but when one feels that a piece of behavior you don't want anybody to know about, that is a emotional pulse, red light flashing, pounding. You got to talk to somebody about this. Somebody you trust, a supervisor, a therapist, a mentor, whoever it is, because you're in trouble. Something has gotten kindled. The countertransference has gotten unbalanced, and that's not that's a human experience, and I think one of the goals of all of this, and certainly one of the goals of the work we do at Chovevei in terms of having process groups for these students and really encouraging them to be in treatment, is that everybody needs to know their own blind spots and bright spots in terms of what tends to get activated. And it's a little different for all of us. And it's when one does slip, how do you get out? How do you get out with dignity to the other person, to yourself? It's so often rabbis get into these dark, lonely places because they're so ashamed. They're supposed to be so good and so noble, and I think most of the time they are. You are. But everybody is capacity to slip. So that feeling of, I want this to be kept a secret is, okay, not note to self, red, like fire alarm to self. At this point, I want to just pause and invite people to make any comments, because I'm going to go into the, the categories of things that I was talking about. So, anybody want to comment, to talk, to the rest of the group about what we've been talking about?
This is Chaim, and
I
just like us, or I would like to pause a little bit, even if we can't do it now, on this notion of slippery slope and gradual crossing over from boundary crossing to boundary violation.
Okay.
And some of those markers where one might be in that gray zone, because that takes introspection, objectivity, and just time for reflection, which is often, it's a challenge.
Right. Right, which is why I think that feeling of like, uh-oh, I don't want anybody to know about this is sort of like the yellow light you see on the roadway. Like that you feel, Like the sense of, should I be doing this? Is it right? And people can do all kinds of rationalizations to themselves. I'm really helping this person. I really understand, all this kind of stuff. But I think people do feel that, I don't want anyone to know about this, is like a helpful... we'll feel that more than we'll feel, should I really be doing this?
So, and just one quick follow-up. So,
please.
Is there a recommendation that you're making for some sort of either structured mentorship, like
yes.
a kind of hadracha ruchanit,
yes.
Therapy, just something to help, make sure that a person doesn't ignore those signals?
Yes, I think that I really think that anybody in a position of spiritual guidance, spiritual authority, which is all of these categories that all these professions, these rabbinic, clergy, whatever professions that I've been referring to, I'm a huge believer that everybody needs a person they can go to. And I mean, maybe for some person, that's a person they go to for psak, but I kind of doubt it. That's sort of a different sort of thing. I mean, it could be, but I definitely think people need I'm a huge believer in having a supervisor. I don't think this is such a Jewish thing, but I know in a lot of the Christian faith traditions, people have spiritual directors. I think somebody who is neutral outside of their community, that's really important, that they can talk to and trust. A therapist would be that kind of person. But I think that I would love to see all clergy have supervisors that they present challenging, pastoral, rabbinic, whatever you want to call it, issues to, like on a once-a-month basis. And I think that their institutions, whatever they are, shuls, hillels, should pay for that. I think that people should ask for that in their contracts, because I think it makes for much, much better rabbiing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so, yeah.
Michelle?
Yep.
It's Amy Alfred.
Uh-huh.
Boy, what you just said, I think has an impact on so many different levels. And Chaim was asking about what to look at in terms of the crossing to violations, and I'm thinking about it in terms of rabbis who are already out there. And
right.
At the same time, I'm also thinking that there are tons of ways that we can impact clergy in training, and to really talk with them about what it feels like just the litmus test that you talk about, because there's so much to do around self-awareness, whether
totally.
they're, practicing for a year or 40 years.
Right.
It's all in different, all in different levels.
Well, the first level is for them not to deny it, to
right.
realize that they're turned on by something, they're excited by something, whether it's a pretty woman, an attractive man, a stock tip, or whatever it is. I mean, I think it's acknowledging that rabbis are humans, and that, okay, so I have this buzz. Oh, I have this buzz. I know that buzz. Let me pay attention to that buzz. I know John Slater, my old hiking buddy from many years ago, Camp Ramaz, on this call, and I think a certain amount, I really treasure the word mindfulness, like knowing,
yes.
This is that color, this is like the red flashing light of a secret, the purple color or the green color of the buzz of erotic excitement, or whatever it happens to be. And so I think that's really, really important. And I definitely think that seminary is the place to get people, thinking about this. And that's why I'm such a huge believer. I mentioned before process group, which some of you may know about from various training. But basically, I took that from my own residency experience, where at Chovevei we have a mental health person assigned to each year. So each cohort which is there for 4 years, gets a shrink of some sort, psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, whatever they're, and they stay with them for the full 4 years, and they meet once a week in confidentiality, and they can talk about anything they want. So if it's a crisis of faith, or they hate their chavrusa, or they're pissed off at the administration, or they're having a problem with their parents. I mean, obviously they're not going to talk about their deepest, darkest, fantasies, because it's not a therapy group, and they're seeing each other and learning together and all that. But it really is a huge bonding thing in terms of, hey, where everyone expects us to be these good, religious, positive, and I think most rabbis are. But by the way, in this talk here, I'm not talking about. I'm really not addressing this to psychopaths. I mean, I do believe that there are people who go into all fields because they really have a kind of malignant sociopathy or narcissism, and they're kind of looking. Maybe they're not aware of it, but there's a kind of a relentless predatory quality. I mean, that's a huge issue, but that's not so much what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about the basic good person who kind of slips, and falls badly, but it hasn't been like at this in a predatory way. But I do think that if you can get people in their seminary years to be told by the authorities, especially their like whether it's their halacha teachers, the Gemara teachers, their the people that they revere in the rabbinic leadership, training, learning track, that wow, you're people, and we got to take care of that too. That's incredibly powerful, and hopefully these bonds that these like our guys have, I know Maharat has process group also, will last in a way, and there's a sense of vulnerability and exposure that is good. That I can learn from this. It's okay. I don't have to be sort of locked up with my thoughts. I see it's 20F, so I want to go to the categories. Now, these are just some categories. I think they're kind of pretty broad. But I just want to go through them because I do think, and we could stop maybe after each one for a moment or two and talk about what your thoughts are about it. So the first one I put down is the name, because before they would tell us in my residency, the contact with the patient starts before they meet you. It's how they heard of you. Well, in those days, this was in the 80s, it was a phone call. But nowadays, of course, the contact with the rabbi is, who knows what it is? It could be Twitter, it could be Facebook, it could be they see a poster, they see a picture, something. I mean, however that first contact is made really sets, a kind of mental representation in motion. But something that the rabbi definitely owns and decides is how he or she wants to be introduced and introduces him or herself. And I think this is a really an important topic to call to people's attention, because whatever somebody's style is, if you're going to be, I'm just looking at Steve is up. If you're going to be Rabbi Krause, Rabbi Steve, Rav Steve, they all have different feelings, And I think that it's kind of all over the map as to how rabbis want to be called. I'm putting this out as questions. I'm not, giving you some kind of like, Torah Messina thing on this. But I just I think it's important for you and certainly for your students to at least think about this. Very often, like on the college campus, tends to go to first names, or maybe it's Rav Steve, all of this is fine. I happen to be a believer in that the otherness of the rabbi and people's conscious or unconscious desire to have the rabbi be this sort of spiritual authority who's a tad distant from the hoi polloi, the amcha, which it can be a drag for rabbis. I mean, rabbis don't always want to be othered and have this responsibility, but guess what? It comes with the territory. I really think it's an occupational responsibility that you can do what you want with, but you got to know it's there. So I personally don't think most people want to go to a neurosurgeon that they call Steve. If you're going to have your brain operated on, you probably want to call the guy Dr. Krause. I think most people do. Some people might not want to, and that's cool. But I think we need to think about it the same way. Like, what's helping people find that balance? What boundary that is evoked by name, again, I'm going back to what's your role, helps people access spiritual stuff. Their murky relationship. What does it mean to be a Jew in the 21st century? How do I relate to this? What's the meaning of life? All that kind of stuff. I mean, if it works for people to be called, Steve or Rav Krause or whatever it is, I just think it shouldn't be taken for granted. And similarly, what rabbis call congregants is something to be thought about, and this is very true for doctors and for other kinds of professionals as well. But does the rabbi call the 80-year-old congregant Martha, or does he call her Mrs. Cohen? And when Mrs. Cohen says, "Oh no, please call me Martha," does the rabbi do that? And if the rabbi has his high school friend visiting for the weekend, or his brother, or whatever, what does that person call the rabbi in public? I mean, would it be kind of odd? It would be kind of odd, maybe for a lot of people, if your brother called you Rabbi Krause in public, but should your high school friend call you Rabbi Krause in public? Again, I don't have any specific answers to this, but I just think that name. I know that name and title evokes a lot of feeling in people, and it's really it's really important. And it kind of gets to the whole thing of who are your friends when you're the rabbi in a community. Now, this I think is particularly challenging for pulpit rabbis. I think it's different for other rabbis who are in schools or hillels or organizations, whatever, because you're not living so much in the world where you're also the rabbi all the time. So this I think is more of an issue for pulpit rabbis. And again, I think it's a particular challenge for women, because so often women are called by first names and men are called by title. I mean, definitely in the Orthodox world, where I've been privileged to be in communities with unbelievably talented women, community scholars, whatever, it would always be Rabbi so-and-so and Ilana Steinhain, and who I'm referring to if people know her. And, when she finally got her PhD, it was like a great day, because then she had a title, But it's like you have to get a doctorate to be called something. So, I mean, I think it's really important. It's going to be very, very interesting. I mean, and I don't know what if people on a call have experience with this. I don't know if women rabbis get called by their first name more than men rabbis do, if they set it out to be that they want to be called by their last name. But I think that this expectation of, what appellations do we give men and women are important. Okay, I'm going to keep on going here, because I see that, it's already 4:15. I went into how you look, grooming, clothing, and behavior, and that's a giant category, because it's like, is there a rabbinic look? Can you go grocery shopping in your sweats? If you're playing on a softball team and it's 1 billion degrees outside, and you're a guy, that's not be happening for women, I don't think, can you take off your T-shirt and play bare-chested? I mean, do you go to a swimming party? Do you go to a beach party and appear in your bathing suit? Do you go to a yoga class? We were talking about yoga before, with congregants or with students or whatever it happens to be. And I think that, what about the behavior of your family? This is a topic that is like gigantic. The rabbi's family, who are always scrutinized. Again, I think more so in the congregation, but I think definitely rabbis who are in education. If their kid screws up, cheats on a test, smokes pot, whatever, like everybody, can you believe it? It's the principal's daughter did that, or the rabbi's, this or that. So certainly, I think that this scrutiny of how do you look, how do you behave, and how does your family behave is something that scrutiny is there. Rabbis do live in a fishbowl, and I think that the whole, like I was saying before, the sense of protection of privacy, so the rabbi can have a regular life, and how much does a rabbi share about his or her kids, et cetera, et cetera. I'll talk about time for a moment. So managing time, I think, is a critical area, and this one is so different from therapist time, because therapists have very, very neat and precise relationships with time, that pretty much end at the 45th or 50th minute, depending on their practice, and there's very efficient billing, and that's that. And so now I'm not saying that we don't do things extra, go over time, but it's like a whole big Torah on that alone. With rabbis, I think that and clergy in general, that is a huge topic of time management. So I personally believe, now, obviously there's the informal, and this is an enormous amount of rabbinic interactions, the informal chat after the minyan or after the committee meeting or whatever it is. And often people want to chat with the rabbi, and they say, my students do this at Chovevei. Can I just talk to you for a minute? But that minute is about some sort of really complicated topic that no minute could possibly ever take care of. And I think that sometimes people say the minute because they want to diminish the scariness or the intensity of the issue, or they think that they shouldn't be burdening you, or it's some combination of those two. But if it's a kind of casual, like we're standing up, it's not as important, it's not as bad, it's not as something. So, sometimes you get people who ask you for a minute, and that minute does not appropriately or respectfully serve what the need seems to be. And other times, they're perfectly happy to get into it, like right then and there, and you don't have even that minute. You're on your way to a next appointment, to your dentist, to your own therapy, to the time that you set aside to do whatever you were going to do, whatever it, and maybe there are times, and I think these are very, very rare times, when you do violate your schedule, and I do think there are times like that for emergencies, for situations that have come up shockingly, whatever, and you do say, okay, I just got to take a couple of minutes to have somebody cover this meeting or pick up my kid or whatever it's going to be. But I think those are very, very rare. I tell my students that I think the more if you're on the fly or if something's somebody asks you a quick question like, what's going to be the Lag Bomer event this year, or, okay, I'm not saying, you're not answering, but I'm talking about much more of a pastoral complex type of thing. I think that it's pretty hard to concentrate when you're in the fruit market, with your 3 kids or something like that, and somebody is asking, and I think it's an invasion of your own privacy. And I think that rabbis can say, and I always try to get them to start from a place of alliance. I'm really honored by your trust, Mrs. Schwartz, but I really can't concentrate right now. Can we talk about this? And then give them a specific time. Can you call me later and we'll make a time? I think you have to absolutely pin down and make your availability known. But I don't think that your private time, the rabbi's private time, or inappropriate place, which is not private, and so if a place isn't private, the information can't be held confidential, is an appropriate place to do it. And I think that you will be distracted and it won't be a good encounter. At the same time, I think that a lot of times rabbis get into this thing that they should give infinite time, and the longer you sit with somebody and thrash out, the pain of, the conversion thing not working out, or the bad diagnosis or whatever, it's going to get better. And actually, this might sound kind of harsh, but I think people will understand. I don't think that more time actually does make that better. I think that, and there's, if anybody who's been in therapy or is in the therapy business themselves knows that like 2 times 20 does not equal 40. So what I mean to say is 2 20-minute sessions are way better than 1 long 40-minute session, or whatever multiplier you want to use. So I tell my guys, if somebody is asked to asks to meet with you, which is not, of course, every pastoral encounter, because many of them are sort of on the fly, but in these more appointment kind of ones, it's much, you got to stick to your time, whether it's 20 minutes, half an hour, that's it for the first one. And if you feel at the end of that, and one needs to keep an eye on the clock and realize that there's a few minutes left, okay, so you say, Mr. So-and-so, Joe, I see we have 5 minutes left. Let's talk about what we talked about today, and should we meet again, or what would be most helpful, or whatever it is, and you make another appointment if you need be. But that notion, which is so many rabbis do, I spent an hour and a half with that couple, and so-and-so, or I spent 2 hours, like it's a sort of a point of pride. But I think that mostly screws up one's day and really doesn't actually accomplish a great deal in the way of counseling. Now, so that's length of time. I am a fanatic. Here I will say, I absolutely do not think that outside of situations of true emergency, rabbis should be having contact with their patients, whoever else, outside of normative hours. And that can be your decision, but I think it's pretty much like between the hours of, 10:30 and morning minion, let's say, no. So if somebody texts you, and this is a huge issue in this electronic era, because a lot of people feel that text and email and whatever else is not like real time. So if you happen to get up because, your baby wakes up or you feel like watching late night TV or something like that, and you see a very poignant text from so-and-so, and you think, oh, I'm so touched that they wrote to me, and whatever, you can write your answer back, but do not press send, because that, I think, becomes a boundary crossing that can easily slip down that slippery slope, because it sets up a sense of specialness, that the person is special, that the situation is special. Once you do that, there's always going to be another one and another one. I'm not saying everybody. I'm not saying everybody's trying to seduce or corrupt or whatever, but it becomes a violation of that an infringement. Take back that violation, an infringement of that private time. And I really am very strict on that one. If you feel like writing, okay, but don't press send. Keep communications in regular time slots, because that, I think, maintains the integrity of that. Where to meet, location, again, similar common sense. Rabbis should not be meeting congregants in dark, alone places. I think all doors should have glass in them in offices. We do that at the HIR building. I think schools should have glass panes in them. Even the door can be closed. People don't have to be listening, but I think that glass pane in the door sets up like there's nothing going on here that can't be seen. If there's not going to be anybody in the shul or school or whatever building, then don't meet there at that time. Meet in the local Starbucks or the 7-Eleven or the library or whatever place there is. Similarly, if somebody needs to go to a person's house, a person's ill, if the person can get out of their bedroom, then they should meet in the kitchen or the living room. And it's much better if somebody else is home. I really think that gives a sense of dignity and appropriateness to the gathering. I'm going to just race through here because we only have 5 minutes. Payments and gifts. That is a big one. Now, a lot of times rabbis have trouble asking for payment for things that they should get paid for. If somebody's asking you to give up your Sunday, it depends a lot on the rabbi's contract and the expectations, and that, of course, should be discussed beforehand. But if somebody's asking you to drive to Kingston, to do their daughter's wedding or their whatever it is, on some lovely farm, I think it's completely appropriate for the rabbi up front to say, to talk about compensation or something like that. Again, a lot of this is going to be dependent on the relationship, etc. But I do think it's important for rabbis to talk about payment, pretty directly. The whole notion of gifts and favors is sort of connected to that, because what's an appropriate gift and what's an inappropriate gift? So, for example, one of my students had his 30th birthday, and he invited, oh, by the way, this is another thing. I don't think the rabbi, and this is like a congregational rabbi, I think it would be different. Obviously, it would be different for an institutional, like if somebody works in a I don't know, some kind of federation office or something. But for a congregational, a pulpit rabbi, I don't think you can have best friends that you invite to a private party. You cannot invite just those people to your kid's wedding or your kid's bar mitzvah or your birthday party, frankly. Either you invite nobody or you invite everybody, because that whole notion of favoritism is very, very pernicious, certainly in the pulpit rabbinate. But I don't want to dwell on that one so much. But when it comes to gifts, so this guy had his 30th birthday party, my student, and he invited the whole congregation, and people gave him like Starbucks cards and, whatever, Amazon things, fine. And somebody gave him a $1,000 check and said, Rabbi, this is for because you and your wife entertain so much, and you should really be compensated for that. And he was very touched by that. It is a lovely and touching thing to do, to pay attention that it costs to do all this hosting. But he said, please send it through the shul budget, because there is that whole thing. And again, if your congregant, if a parent in your school, if somebody in your whatever federation group invites you to use their ski chalet for the weekend, or I'm not using it anyway, Rabbi, it'd be great. I'd love for you to use it. I know it's hard. You're serving us, and you don't get paid in the same way. I think that's something that people have to think about. I'm not coming down hard line. Okay, but I want to get to the last two because these are really the big ones. Personal information and disclosure. This is like a gigundo one. How much of yourself as a rabbi do you disclose to people? Now, a certain amount of information is going to be known. People are going to know if you get divorced, if you lose, God forbid, a parent, if something happens to one of your children. And some of this stuff they're going to ask you about that. Many people will ask a rabbi, have you lost a parent? Like just trying to get a sense of, there's a lot of reasons for asking that, which we don't have time to go into right now. But some of the information that I think is common knowledge, you can just think about it. Do you want to disclose that or not? But if you're at school and says, Rabbi, well, you must have smoked pot. Didn't you smoke pot? Or did you ever do coke? Or, come on, don't tell me you never had sex until whatever. Like, how much of that should the rabbi disclose? And I actually almost always think that the specific information is not that useful, whether you did or didn't do anything. But I think one can refer in a more third-person way to something I've thought about this situation is. What helped me, or somebody talks, like somebody asks, did you lose a parent? And let's say they have whatever relationship with that parent, positive, negative, terrible. I think it's most helpful. People generally don't want to know the specific information. They want to know what helped. I hear the time is up, and we're right before physical contact, which is, that's kind of a Rubicon of this. But in a lot of ways, it's the most common sense. I think that depending on your denominational affiliation or personal practice or whatever, the whole thing of one of the things I have to say, a bugaboo of mine in the Orthodox world is I think you either shake hands or hug men and women, or you don't do either. It's like hugging male rabbis hugging men and not shaking hands with women is very lopsided and feels, kind of dismissive. So I'm sort of like an equal opportunity, like basic physical contact type of approach here. But I do think that it's very important. Like if you're counseling somebody and they start weeping, or there's some kind of, a reach for a hug, like to really be mindful of that and to know how to respond. Anyway, that's a big one, but it is exactly one, and it's time to go. Steve, what do we do now? Stop. Is there time for any questions? Hello?
Michelle, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm not hearing.
I'm here.
I'm still here.
That's who? Who's
I'm here still.
Okay, I'm just going to open up my. I'm sorry, I'm not looking. Oh, okay, so people are still on. So I'm happy to stop here and to have a couple of minutes of discussion about these. I know I went through a lot of stuff, but if people would like to chat about this, I'm available for a few more minutes. To respond to any of the points that I made. You agree, disagree.
If somebody wants to speak, remember you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. People, unmute yourself if you want to speak. I have covered, albeit a little bit short, the last thing, but anyway, that's kind of the easiest. So I'm happy to stop now because it is just after 1. Or if people would like to add anything, any responses from their own life experience, please do.
Michelle, it's Amy Alfred. I didn't speak at first just now because I think you really did cover so many things, and so I'm just trying to process each of the things because I think they're so important. Again, I guess I'm going back to the, you talk about where to meet and payments and gifts and personal info and physical contact. And I guess all those things, of course, are important as long as the rabbi, as he or she understands before doing any of this, kind of what their role is, as you say, what their role is in the relationship, and what exactly is a boundary, and protecting self and others. Then it will make each of these crossroads or junctures when they have to think about, should I do X or Y, a little more clear. Because I mean, I just think in general, as people grow up, we don't teach them how to set boundaries necessarily.
Right.
This
Right.
isn't just a skill that everybody has, and we do in middle school. So that's where I am as you're ending. I have plenty to say, but I think I'm just swirling it all around for the moment.
Okay. All right.
And, and I look forward, I guess, to other forums, to be talking about this kind of stuff, and whether anyone has information that they were talking about that they want to share, maybe through Steve. I'd love to have it.
Okay.
And this is Chaim again, and then I apologize as I'm going to have to go. But
yes,
number one, thank you. Really refreshing and spot on. And are you aware of any publications yet, or are you planning to write any, that deal with the question of boundaries in an age of social media?
Yeah, I mean, we're putting a little bit of that in the book, but I definitely think it's a huge impact. I mean, there's so much, for example, that's known. I mean, is a rabbi supposed to be cultivating the future rabbi? Like, is some 12-year-old supposed to think I'm going to be a rabbi, so I got to cultivate my Facebook page as though I might run for president someday? I mean, it's like, but I do think that's there's both. Is that the part you're referring to? Like how much you can find out about people? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and also you touched upon this idea of you email if an email comes in late, but don't hit send until the next day. But the pressure of wanting to be present, available, also understanding how you might be undermining your own self and work by always being available.
Right. Yeah, another thing I forgot to mention, and I know this is an issue for our YCT guys, is there's a sense of competition with people who are available, which might be Chabad. Like, everybody can come anytime, and it's open, and it's always like, and that's a sense of, and I don't mean to cast any aspersion. I mean, we could talk about that, but that's not the point. I think that there's a sense of, somebody else is doing that. And if I don't do that, which might be the lawyer's dilemma also, if I don't answer my BlackBerry or iPhone during dinner, someone else is going to get the case, So there's a tremendous sense of like the work never stops. There's no privacy. Yeah, I think it's really important.
Thank you.
All right, listen, folks, it's been a pleasure. I hope that this was useful, and I wish you all a wonderful Shavuos.
So before we formally say goodbye, I want to once again thank Michelle for her openness, for her being such a refreshing voice on so many important issues, and leaving us with lots of things to think about. I also want to personally thank her for making me a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
One of the things I often used to say when I was in organizations which were so worried about what was going on, I always used to say, what do you think? This is neurosurgery? It's not like but now that you've made me that, I will have to.
That's funny. It's because I read a New Yorker piece last night about a British neurosurgeon. I think that's why it came to my mind.
Just one last piece of business. Chaim sent me a list of things that have been happening, which I will forward to you in the last few days. Also, next Wednesday at 7 p.m., those of you who are in the New York area, if you're interested, the Jewish Week in partnership with Temple Emmanuel Skirball Center is presenting a program called Who Will Lead Us? Training Tomorrow's Rabbis Today, inspired by the book, which was edited by Chaim and Eli Rusher and was the topic of our Acre conference in December. Chaim will be having a conversation with Rabbi Joshua Davidson, Rabbi David Ellenson, Rabbi Joy Levitt, and Dr. Erin Lieb-Smokler. So
Lovely.
Thank you all very much. Michelle,
Wonderful.
it was wonderful.
Okay.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.